Shalom, I am Rabbi Gabriel Lumbroso. I am a Messianic rabbi and a Hebrew teacher. I teach biblical and modern Hebrew. And in case anybody told you that they're very different one from the other, I would say that they are closer together than uh, Victorian English as compared to modern English. In case you hear an accent, it's because I have one, so you do not need to try to adjust the sound. It is my accent, and I was born in France from a Tunisian family that came to France after World War II, after they were expelled by the Germans um, from their village. But that's a story for another day. When I was a teenager, I made Aliyah. I immigrated to Israel as an Israeli citizen. I still hold Israeli nationality, and I went to school, continued high school in kibbutz called Kibbutz Nitzanim, which is part of the Ashkelon district, and then the war started. It was 1973. The Yom Kippur War started, and that was quite an experience being there during the war. Then, when I was a teenager, a later teenager, I returned to France, where I was what you used to call in those days a hippie, roaming the streets of Europe. And it is as I was doing so that I met a young man who introduced me to Yeshua, not to Jesus, because I knew about Jesus. I was raised in France, but he introduced me to Yeshua. He did so. The difference was that instead of introducing me to John 3:16, he introduced me to Isaiah 53. And this is what I want to talk about today: the Hebrew Messianic mindset. So, but first I want to say I'm not an expert in Jewish culture. I'm just Jewish. I was raised in a family that was conservative. The word conservative in Judaism doesn't mean the same thing as it does in Christianity. When you talk about conservative Christian, you talk about an evangelical who is very adamant in keeping certain values. In Judaism, that would refer more to what you call the Orthodox and the ultra Orthodox. The conservatives are a little bit more. I don't like to say lax on things, because it's not a question. I do not. In the Jewish world, you have several levels. You have what you call reforms, then you have conservative, then you have orthodox, then ultra orthodox. Usually people put them that way, with the ultra orthodox at the top of the top as the most religious people, and the reform hardly being Jews, hardly considered Jews by the orthodox and ultra orthodox. But that's not true. It more goes like this. It is rather a question of culture, where you grew up, and personal understanding. The conservative do not think that they are less religious than the Orthodox. Really, they think that they have sometimes a clearer understanding, and that the Orthodox are a bit too extreme. And they also think that the reforms are a little bit too loose. But the Reformed do not think that they're looser than the other ones. They think that they have a better understanding. So it is all a question. Everybody has their own views as to why they do what they do, and those views are very rational and they're very good. And the answers will come when Yeshua returns. As a conservative Tunisian, what my life was, my parents themselves were not religious at all. They were Zionists. They identified as Jews, Zionist Jews, but they did not eat kosher. They did not do any of the festivals. I actually asked them, I said, I want to learn about this. I want to do it. So at 11 years old, I started my religious education by going to Talmud Torah. And I also adhere to Jewish Youth Club. During the weekends and free times, I didn't go and play soccer with the other kids. I was part of Zionist Jewish groups, political, political Zionist groups that believed that Jews were supposed to return to the land of Israel. And these groups were not today. A group like this would be considered right-wing Israel, but it's not true. These groups were actually left wing, because the idea of right wing, left wing is very different from that of France to that of America and to that of Israel. So, and again, this is something for another day. But when you hear right wing in Israel, it doesn't mean the same thing that it means here. So, uh, so, and as Tunisians, we were what's considered Sfaradim, as opposed to Ashkenazim. Ashkenazim are Jews that originate from Eastern Europe. This is the culture of Jews that goes maybe from Germany eastward. They developed this particular language called Yiddish, which is a mix of German and Hebrew, and a particular pronunciation of Hebrew, and even a set of traditions and cultures that are very different from that of Sfaradim. Sfaradim, the word Sfarad means Spain. And the Jews from Spain and Sfaradim Jews are considered all the Jews from Spain, France, Greece, North Africa, Turkey, basically Mediterranean Jews. And they add also the Middle Eastern Jews from Yemen and Europe, and Yemen and Iraq and Iran. So that's all part of that. So it is said that Sfaradim are less, a more conservative side, more on the conservative side. Now the word, just something that why do they call Sfaradim Jews from Spain, and the word Sfarad today is also the word used for Spain. And the reason is very simple, but it's quite interesting. A long, long time ago, and I don't know the exact date, but I do have it somewhere on one of my presentations, many Jews from Israel went to Europe, to the Iberian Peninsula. It was not called that in those days, but it became called the Iberian Peninsula because of these Jews who went there. In Genesis 10, one of the sons of Shem is Eber. And Eber, the sons of Eber, therefore, they went to that place. So it was called the Iberian Peninsula after that. And these people were people of the book. The word book in Hebrew is Sefer. Sfaradim, therefore, are the people of the book. That's what they do. So this is a little bit on the background. To understand these things is very, very important in understanding how Jews even understand messianism. Yes. So um, people say that Jews don't believe in the Messiah. Nothing could be more untrue than that. Um, in John, and I'm going to look at my computer here because I have all my verses here. In John 4:22, Yeshua is faced with a woman from Samaria. Now, the Samaritans were a mix, and it's you can see their history in the books of Second Kings, Second Chronicles, somewhere in there. But they had developed a different type of religion. They had created a pseudo Judaism, and that started after the Solomonic era, when the kingdom was divided between north and south, and Jeroboam, the first king of the northern area, the 10 tribes, Jeroboam the first, is the one who created that pseudo Judaism. That's a story again for another day, but that is straight in the Bible. You can read it in First Kings. Um, but the Samaritan had developed a religion where the worship center was Mount Gerizim near Shechem. So, and the big question of the day was, where do you worship? In Jerusalem, the land of Judea, or Gerizim? It was a big question of the day. So right away when the lady from Samaria, she saw that she had in her hand at least a prophet, she's going to ask him the $10,000 question of the day. Where should we worship? Mount Gerizim or Mount Zion? And Yeshua's answer was, you people don't know what you are worshiping. We worship what we do know. So you guys really don't know what's going on. But we know, we, the Jews. She talked to him as a Jew, meaning not just any Jew, as a Judean. When the New Testament talks of the word Jew, it should be translated as Judean, somebody from Judea. And then he said to her that that salvation comes from the Jews. And when he says that, he didn't say it comes from the Israelites. The word is Yehudim, which is the word Jews, but more specifically the word Judean. And salvation does come from the Judean because, as everybody knows, the Mashiach, the Messiah, is supposed to come from the tribe of Judah, the people from Jerusalem. So he says, you know that salvation comes from the Judean, so why do you ask me? You know that. Salvation comes from the descendant of Judea, Jerusalem. So that is very important. And Jews have always known the Messiah. And actually, if anyone knows who is the Messiah today, it's because of the Judeans and the Israelite people who've been waiting for him, just talking about him. And I'll tell you some more stories later on how, as far as Talmudists, people who study the Talmud and Jewish commentaries, as far as Talmudists are concerned, the Messiah has always been with them and is still with them. So it's a concept. Jews believe in Messiah. The only problem is that they have not identified him in our present day known person as Jesus or Yeshua. And that is a very important concept. Why haven't they identified him? I would say the first generation of people, they had identified him. That's why they killed him. Any false prophet they would kill, but there was many other people, false prophets in those days, that they didn't kill. But this one was dangerous. So, and by the way, it's not the Pharisees who killed him, it's the Sadducees, the priests. There was two sects, and they both hated each other. The Pharisees wanted to question him, and that's the way you learn, by asking questions. There is always this idea that they were always at his throat, asking him questions, but not really. Some people didn't like him, but not all the Pharisees. Some very famous Pharisees loved him. Nicodemus, who was very highly placed in the Sanhedrin, Joseph of Arimathea, many of them loved him. Gamaliel respected him. We see that in the book of Acts. And many others loved him in secret. But the Sadducees, oh boy, they hated him. They hated him because he represented everything they didn't believe in. You see, the Sadducees, they were like sola scriptura people. They were like sola scriptura people of today. The people who only believe in the written word. But sola scriptura is not Jewish at all. The Jews, they believe in the apocryphal writings, they believe in all the extracurricular writings, they believe in the historical writings, they believe that they are needed, they believe in the Talmud, they believe that all that is needed in order to get a proper picture of the biblical text itself. But the Sadducees said no, sola scriptura. They're like the Karaite Jews of today who only believe the written text. But as a result, when you only believe the written text, what happens is, as a result, the Sadducees of the day, they didn't believe in a Messiah, they didn't believe in life eternal, they didn't believe in the resurrection of the dead, they didn't believe in the kingdom of heaven. That's why they were sad, you see. So there's Yeshua, who presented himself as the Son of God, who's going to resurrect, who talked about the kingdom of heaven and all that and all that. He represented everything they didn't believe in. But that was everything the Pharisees believed in. So this was very, very important. Jews believed and waited for the Messiah. Now, why is it that they have not been able to identify the Messiah in Yeshua? That is a very important question. People have this idea from movies, that after the resurrection, the disciples were all in disarray and hiding. For a while it was so, but if you read in the book of Acts, it was very different. In the book of Acts, let me find in my text here. I'm going to find everything. In the book of Acts, at one point in Acts 5, the disciples get arrested for teaching at the temple. And at that time, it says, I want to find the exact place. I'm gonna find it exactly. I just want to find you the exact verse. And actually, you can find it yourself. But at one time, they were arrested, and it says that the priests, the people who had arrested the disciples, they did not want to touch the disciples. because they had fear of the people. So here, maybe 2, 3 months, not even, maybe a little bit after, I don't know, less than 6 months after the crucifixion, after crucifying Yeshua, now they're afraid to touch his disciples because of the people. That means that the movement had gained such a popularity. And you bet, 3,000 men in one day, 5,000 men in another. The movement was big. James, the brother of Yeshua, was allowed to go in the temple and pray. He was known to have holes in the clothing, in the knee place of his clothing, because he spent so much time praying for Israel. So, and he had great clout, James. Everybody knew him, loved him. And there is another place where Paul returns from his second trip abroad, and he wants to shed a Nazarite vow. He needs to do a sacrifice. James meets him and says, hey, look, you really have a problem here. People think that you're teaching against Moses and the law and the sacrifices and all that. Oh boy. So James says, look, show them that it's not true, because it is not true. He was not teaching against these things. He was teaching abroad a Judaism for export. But he'd never asked the Jews to stop doing anything they're not supposed to do. So James understood that, so he told Paul, look, in order to show good that you're okay, we have 4 disciples here who also have a Nazarite vow on them. Why don't you get together with them and together shed your vows? And actually Paul paid for it, and that was very expensive to do. To understand all that, what that means, you have to study a little bit about what is the Nazarite vow. So that was important. What I'm trying to say here is that after the crucifixion, the resurrection happened, and the resurrection was the actual sign that Yeshua was really who he claimed to be. And because of that, and it says for 40 days he went around all Israel teaching people about the kingdom of God. He was seen by about 500 people. The movement was very popular until we get to Acts 13. It's so popular that Herod wants to put James to death. And a great persecution started. Why would a persecution start if the movement was in hiding? You don't persecute a little movement that's in hiding. You only persecute a movement that threatens the status quo because it is so popular. So, there's a lot of people who believe in the area of Judea, where Yeshua had done many miracles, and also in Galilee, where he had done many miracles, and in Samaria, where he had done miracles and stayed there quite a while teaching. Twice he went to Samaria. So in those days, people believe in him. And also here there's something, a history that is very important to understand. There is classic Judaism and modern Judaism. Classic Judaism is I would say, the pre-Second Revolt Judaism. And modern Judaism is the post-Second Revolt Judaism. Because what happened? I'm going to tell you some stories. During the first revolt, every year at Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, which is usually somewhere in August, people remember the destruction of the temple, because this is a very important day in Jewish history. It is the day when the spies returned with an evil report. It is the day when the first temple, the destruction of the first temple was initiated, the day where the destruction of the second temple was initiated. It was the day where the expulsion from Spain was initiated. It is the day that the events that led to World War One and then World War Two with the Holocaust were initiated. Very important date in Jewish history. But at Tisha B'Av, if you ask any rabbi what made the destruction of the temple, they won't tell you it's the Romans. They'll tell you is hatred without a cause. The hatred of the zealots, the fundamentalist, extremist Jewish. We could call them terrorists because what they did, the zealots, they actually, in their zealotry, caused Jerusalem to fall. And this is really important to remember that. It's not the Romans who did it. It was done by the Romans, but the the trigger came from the zealots, the religious fundamentalists. They were not so religious. They were just full of hatred. And what happened is that the Romans, they had started a siege, the siege of Jerusalem. At that time, many of the Messianics, they saw Jerusalem surrounded with armies, and they remembered the words of the Master, so they fled. They fled to Petra and Pella, which is further than Petra in the east in Jordan. And you can read the whole story of the flight to Pella, Pella. During that time, actually that's what caused the division between the traditional Jews and the Messianic Jews. The traditional Jews felt that the Messianic Jews left, but they were just following the Master, what he said, when Jerusalem shall be surrounded with armies, then leave. So yes, so the Romans started a siege, and during that siege, Jerusalem was divided into four factions of opposing zealots who fought each other for control of the city. Nicodemus, who was a very, 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 very rich man, and another Pharisee, I think it was Joseph of Arimathea, they put their wealth together to buy grain to help the city survive for 20 years, survive a 20-year siege. But the zealots were afraid that this wealth, that this seeming wealth would cause people to be more compromising and not really fight for freedom. So they actually burnt that reserve, and Jerusalem became a place of sickness, cannibalism, whatever you have it. Nobody was allowed to leave Jerusalem. And the zealots, they kept a tight lid on everything. They didn't want anybody to go surrender to the Romans. One rabbi called Yochanan ben Zakkai, he's a rabbi who may have most likely known Yeshua, because many of the things he said are reminiscent to Yeshua. Or, Yeshua really taught Judaism, so maybe it's not even so obvious, but anyway, so he had an idea. He says, we got to get to the Roman. It is true. We need to do. Josephus was teaching you guys, unless you surrender, you're going to die. It was the same message that Jeremiah taught in Jerusalem when the Babylonians were during the Babylonian siege. When he taught, put your neck under the yoke of Babylon and live. And this is what Josephus was telling, but people would not listen. Until this day, Josephus is considered a traitor in Jewish history. But this rabbi said, no, we got to do something. So he told his disciples, I got to go see the Roman governor, the Roman general. And his disciples said, but you can't. Only dead people go. I said, okay, I'll go as a dead person. What? So he said, look, spread the word that I'm sick. Sick unto death. Everybody's sick anyway. It won't be surprising. I'm old. And then after 2 weeks, when the word is well spread that I'm sick, put me in a something, this thing you put dead people to take them out. Forget the word. And put a rotten piece of meat in my sheets, and take me out. So, okay. So they try. And as they go out, the zealot says, who's going out? Says, oh, this is our poor rabbi. He's dead. Says, oh, okay, let's see if he's dead. And they get ready to spear him. And the the disciples, oh, but no, look, what are the Romans gonna think that we do to our holy man? So they said, okay, let him go. So they went. And as soon as he was out, far away, Yochanan ben Zakkai had a very miraculous resurrection, and he went to the camp of the Romans. When he arrived, he greeted General Titus with an imperial greeting. And Titus told him, you're twice a traitor. You deserve to die twice because you betrayed your own people, and now you call me, you greet me with an imperial greeting, which is a greeting that is only reserved for the emperor. You can't do that. I'm not an emperor. My father is. Right at this moment, a message came for General Titus, telling him that his father died and that he was the emperor now. So Titus was really impressed. So what he did, he said, I want to give you a reward for your prophecy. And of course, if you want to give a reward to a rabbi, be careful, he's going to ask for three. And that's exactly what he did. And these three were loaded ones. He says, first, I want you to free all the rabbis in the city. Second, I want a doctor to tend to the sick rabbis. Third, there is a place there is a building in Yavne, the city of Yavne, that we want to use to create an academy. Because you're going to take the city, Jerusalem is fallen, Israel's going to fall, and I want to create an academy to take care of the people while we're all in diaspora. And Titus said yes. And as he said yes, then this Yavne Academy was created. It took a while, of course, but it was created. And this Yavne Academy is responsible, really, and it was a miracle. It was good. This Yavne Academy we can thank the Yavne Academy for being what kept Judaism alive during all these years. It is there that, Judaism is a religion that is geographically centered. It's about a temple in a city, in a country. Without it, it's all dead. So they recreated Judaism for diaspora, and that became modern Judaism. And that's where we get all the ideas of Judaism that we practice today. The Friday night Kiddush, the Passover Seder, the Sukkot, at the booths at Sukkot, the special round Chalat, Shavuot, and all the things that are practiced today, they are based from what was done and studied to create a religion that was not Jerusalem temple dependent, but that could be practiced from home. Everything about Judaism is about home. In Christianity, people give importance to the service at the church. But in Judaism, it's a Passover Seder at home. The booth you build at home for Sukkot. The Friday night Kiddush. where you celebrate the arrival of the Shabbat is more important than the service at the synagogue on Saturday. It's all about home because Jews have been people without a home for 2,000 years, without a land for 2,000 years. Religion is based for a home, and I think it's very. I read an article recently about somebody, a Jew, who was writing about Christians complaining that churches were asked to close or circumvent their numbers of attendance because of COVID. And that Jewish writer wrote, he says, if today they would want to stop all um, today they would want to stop all religious services, it would kill Christianity, but it would not kill Jews because we are used to worship from home. Our religion is a home religion. So so now we're up to modern Judaism. Now the people who created this modern Judaism, they were not people who believed that Yeshua was the Messiah. Whereas there was this academy in Yavne, there was another academy in Mount Zion. That was the Academy of Messianics who had returned from Pella. And there is even elements of, if you see a Jewish Siddur, I'm going to show you a Jewish Siddur. I have one here. I want to see if my here, I don't want my thing to go. Here, this is a Jewish Siddur. It's a Sephardic Siddur. You know, so there's prayers in there that talk about the return of Messiah. There is even a couple of prayers that are attributed to Peter, because as these people were trying to recreate a Judaism without Jerusalem, it's very possible they shared notes. Peter has a large history within the restoration of Jerusalem, of Judaism. Excuse me. So, but modern Judaism did not see Yeshua as the Messiah, so they reinterpreted prophecies like Isaiah 53. Like, for example, Isaiah 53 is hinted at in Acts 2:23 when Peter. Today, if you ask a Jew, Isaiah 53 is about Yeshua, say, no, 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 it's not. It's about Israel. But wait a minute. Isaiah 53 is not an oracle that stands by itself. It's a part of a larger oracle that starts at Isaiah 40. And in Isaiah 40, it's called the prophecies of the servant. Sorry. The prophecy of the servant. And if you learn Hebrew, you'll realize that Hebrew is very gender and number related. Today we say the word you. It can be in you masculine singular, you feminine singular, you masculine plural, you feminine plural. You never know who's talking, who you're talking to, because it's you. But not in Hebrew. In Hebrew is very gender and number sensitive, so you know who you're talking to. And the pronouns are either masculine plural, but sometimes they are masculine singular. In that big prophecy that starts at Isaiah 40, which continues into Isaiah 53. And the one in Isaiah 53 is masculine singular, talking about a person. So whereas modern Jews can say to people who don't know Hebrew, no, it's about Israel. Somebody who knows the Hebrew can challenge that and say, look at it for yourself. And I actually did one time with a rabbi, and he says, oh boy, I never saw that. But whereas modern Jews, they say that Isaiah 53 applies to Israel, classic Judaism does not. And in Acts 2, the time of classic Judaism, 2:23, when Peter tries to explain what happened at the house when they had the big earthquake and the tongues of fire on the day of Shavuot, Pentecost. He talks about Yeshua. He brings people back. He explains. He brings people back to what happened 2.5 months before, during Passover, 50 days before Passover, and he says, this man, Yeshua, was arrested in accordance with God's predetermined plan and foreknowledge. That means this man, whom I say is the Messiah, was arrested. And then through the agency of persons not bound by the Torah, basically through the agency of the Romans, you nailed him up on a stake and killed him. Then he said, but God has raised him up and freed him from the suffering of death. So there, what he's implying, in accordance with God's predetermined plan and knowledge, is it's Isaiah 53 that tells us about that. There's no other way he could know it but by that. And then in 3:18, Acts 3:18, he says, but this is how God fulfilled what he had announced in advance, mainly when he spoke through all the prophets, namely that his Messiah was to die. Again, that's Isaiah 53. And if you read early Jewish commentaries, Isaiah 53 is all about the Messiah. There is ancient writings from the Mishnah, which is an ancient commentary, and the Gemara, another one. They talk about Isaiah 53 as a Messiah. But today's Jews, they don't want to say that because it's too obvious. More Jews have identified Messiah through Isaiah 53 than with any other verse. Okay, so this is important to know. Jews today, a Jew will tell you also that God does not have a son, but it is not true. To me, the father of Messianic Judaism is King David, and when you read Paul's explanation of who is Messiah, his theology, his Christology, more scripture from the Psalms are brought to the fore than anything else, because to me King David was a messianic prophet. He says, he talks about in one of the Psalms, he says, kiss the Son lest he be angry. And I forget where is this one, but here this one is Psalm 2:7. I would proclaim the decree. Adonai said to me, you are my son. Today I became your father. And the Hebrew is much more specific. He said, today I have conceived thee. That what he says, today I have conceived thee. And this is very important, because actually in Christianity people do not believe that Messiah was begotten at a certain time, believe he was eternal. But here it's talking in Psalm 2:7, it says, this day I've begotten you. And another point of Messiah that is brought is in Proverbs 8. That's King Solomon, the son of King David. It says, of course, the word in English Bibles use the word wisdom, but as far as classic Judaism is concerned, this whole prophecy that start from Proverbs 8:12 until 8:36 is Messiah talking. He says, our wisdom live together with caution, art, and knowledge with discretion. Verse 22 says, Adonai made me at the beginning of his ways, the first of his ancient works. I was appointed before the world, before the start, before the earth's beginning. When I was brought forth, there was no ocean depth, no springs brimming with water. I was brought forth before the hills, before the mountains had settled in place. When he established the mountains, verse 27, when he established the heavens, I was there. When he drew the horizon circle on the deep, when he set the skies above the place, and all that, you can read it yourself. But it's talking about the Jewish concept of who Messiah is. In Judaism, Messiah, there are seven things that were created before even creation, and one of them is the name of Messiah. Many of them teach, actually, like Yeshua said, "I'm the light of the world." That Messiah was created when he said, "Let there be light." He is the light of the world. Now, this is all a Jewish thing, and I know it might be very different than when you're used to, but this is how Jewish teachings view Messiah. And then John 1 actually confirms it, because it says, in John 1, it says, in the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, and that idea of the Word, the Jewish word is memra, memra, which is basically the saying. Now, what today so much has been written about what did John mean. Everybody has logos and this and that. But when Jews of his John's day read that, they said, "Yeah, of course. Now I understand who is this Yeshua." It was like duh for them, because you see, in 586 BCE, Babylon came and took everybody into exile for 70 years. After 70 years, people came back and they didn't speak Hebrew anymore. And we can read in the book of Ezra, at one point, Ezra wants to, it is said that on the Feast of Tabernacle, the king or the priest, someone is supposed to read the Torah to the people of Israel. People are supposed to come to Jerusalem to listen to the Torah. So that's what they did. But Ezra realized that people don't speak Hebrew anymore. They speak Aramaic. And this is why it says in English, it says somebody expounded on the word. But the Hebrew says somebody translated. You can read it yourself if you know your Hebrew. I know a good teacher, by the way. So, so, but as I said, well, already we had to go to exile because people were not exposed to the word enough. Once every 7 years at Sukkot, it's not enough. So he created the synagogue system, where there were synagogues in every town, village, and in the synagogue, people would read the Torah every week. And this is when the parasha system started to get created, and reading from the text in a year. So, but also a little bit later, the leaders of Israel, the religious leaders of Israel, realized that people did not understand the Hebrew so much. So they needed to do a translation in what's called Aramaic. Aramaic is a Semitic language that I would place it Aramaic and Arabic. No, Hebrew and Arabic. Aramaic is in the middle. And so they wrote a Torah in Aramaic called the Targum, meaning the translation. And but when they wrote it, they ran into a problem. The problem was that in order for us to understand who is God and how He works, there is a lot of wording in the Hebrew text that gives Him physical attributes, like He walks like a strong man, He whistles, He's got wings, his nose is, it's like his eyes, his mouth, his ears, his arm. And and because Israel was actually the only country that didn't have an idol for their God, idolatry was a constant problem. And they say if they start translating this book in the language of the common people, they're gonna start making this idol with this description of God that they see in the text with wings and this and that. It's going to be like a chicken, it's going to be like an eagle, it's going to be like all kinds of stuff, and a man is going to be weird. So, and like a fire too. So, what they did is that every time that they encountered a physical representation, a wording that gave a physical representation to God, they wrote the word memra, which is the word of the Lord. And you can still find it and you can do this research yourself if you go to what's called Targum Onkelos or Targum Yonatan. You can find whereas in the Bible it says the word of the Lord, or the Lord appeared in the form of an angel, or this and that, the Targum would say the Memra of the Lord, which is the equivalent of saying and the word of the Lord. So when John wanted to explain to people who is Yeshua, he said, in the beginning was the Memra. So, yeah, we know what's the Memra, yeah, what's new. And the Memra was with God. Okay, we know that. And the Memra was God. Well, you remember every time God appeared, it's the Memra. People say, yeah, well, that's... The Memra was with God in the beginning. Yeah, we know that. All things came to be through him. Without him, nothing was made into being. Now, people understood, because of Proverbs 8, that the Memra was the agent through which God made creation. That was a duh thing for them. They knew what he was saying. In him, in the Memra, was life, and the life was the light of mankind. Now we're getting into the light business. And then he gets into Yohanan, but then he says in verse 14, then, John 1:14, then the Memra became flesh, human being, and lived with us. So this is the understanding, really, of Messiah from a Jewish perspective. But the problem is that, well, I was talking before how come Jews today do not recognize him. Well, it's a sad story, really, because if he had been represented as a Jewish guy, eating kosher, going to synagogue, studying from Torah every Saturday, people would have done that. But what happened is that right away, some traditional Jews who were against him, like the Sadducees or hard-nosed Pharisees, and even early Messianic believers who didn't want to have anything to do with the Jews because they were afraid of Roman reprisals, they started teaching Yeshua as this man who actually teaches against Moshe, against the traditions of the fathers, against the Torah observant, against eating kosher, against all these things Jewish. And Jews are told let me find it, this one I want to read. It's in Numbers, I think 15. '18 maybe. Oh, maybe Deuteronomy 15. Anyway, you can find it. It's about the false prophet. If a prophet comes, and even if he does miracles and prophecies come to pass and everything, but he does not observe Torah, you shall not fear him. So when a prophet gives a false prophecy, you shall not fear him. Today I hear all kinds of prophets giving all kinds of prophecy in the name of God. Those prophecies don't come through, and people keep listening to them. I just don't get it. If you say, well, I think this might happen, that's different. But if you say, the word of the Lord told me that this is going to happen, if that doesn't happen, bye-bye. So 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 there was that happened, and then later on, the Messiah has been represented as this Catholic guy with the Sacred Heart and aura with a Roman toga and Greek philosophical head. That was totally against the view of the Jews, and who doesn't do Shabbat and doesn't eat kosher. Of course, they're not gonna. Actually, when Jews do not recognize the Christian idea of Jesus, they actually take a stand for the Torah. Because the Torah says, if somebody teaches against Torah, he shall not be feared nor listened to. So it's a question of misrepresentation here. I want to share one last thing. It's about Marc Chagall. Marc Chagall, he's a 19th century Eastern European artist, Jewish artist. Um, he has a gallery in New York. But if you can't go to New York to see the gallery, especially right now, you can go to the Google Marc Chagall gallery in the section. If you type in your Google images Marc Chagall paintings, you'll see a whole slew of them. And if you look at them, and there are a lot about Eastern Europe. There's a lot of fiddlers in there. He's Eastern European Jew. He's not a believer, but if you look at his paintings, he's got a lot of cross. Several of them have crosses on it. A cross with a Yeshua on it, wearing a talit, wearing tefillin. But he's not a believer. But for him, Yeshua is a quintessential Jew, the person persecuted without a cause, just because he is Jewish. And he's got a beautiful one. It's one of my favorite from Marc Chagall. It's about the Exodus. We're studying the Exodus right now. And this picture of the Exodus is actually, you can see there is all the people with Moses in front wearing the table of the Torah. And in the back there's a cross with a Yeshua. Wow, where'd that come from? Well, if you remember, in Exodus 17, it is written that, I'll read it. The whole community of the people of Israel left the Sinai desert, traveling in stages. So Adonai had ordered and camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. The people quarreled with Moshe, demanding, "Give us water to drink." But Moshe replied, "Why pick a fight with me? Why are you testing Adonai?" However, the people were thirsty for water there and grumbled against Moshe. And they said, For what did you bring us out of Egypt, to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst? Moshe cried out to Adonai, "What am I to do with these people? They're ready to stone me." Adonai answered Moshe, "Go on ahead of the people and bring with you the leaders of Israel. Take your staff in your hand, the one you used to strike the water, and go. I will stand in front of you there on the rock in Horeb. You are to strike the rock, and water will come out of it so that the people can drink." Moshe did this in the sight of the children of Israel. It is said there is no more complaint, actually. There's no more complaint of water from the children of Israel. There were about 6 million people. No, 3 million people, sorry. There's no more complaint until the day it is reported that Miriam dies. You know, where did all their water come from? Well, in Judaism, they talk about the rock actually followed them. And this we can also read from the Jewish rabbi Paul in 1 Corinthians 10 verse 4, where it says, "They all drank of the same drink from the Spirit, for they drank from a Spirit-sent rock which followed them, and that rock was the Messiah." Now understand this picture from Marc Chagall, with Moshe in the front, all the people then behind Moshe, and behind the people Messiah that followed them in the desert. And of course, in all of this, I only scratched the surface. This is only the tip of a very, very large iceberg. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. And if I don't see you till then, I wish you a good week, or a Shabbat Shalom, or a Happy New Year. Shalom.